This is the Dungeon Master's Handbook. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Dungeon Master's Handbook. I'm Michael Shorten, also known as Chicago Wiz, and I'm really glad you're here with me. This episode, we're going to finish up on some of the thoughts that I had about starting an old school style Sandbox campaign. I thought it might be interesting to talk about what I did after the first year and after 3 years. Those were some key points that I hit in my campaign where I kind of took a look back and saw how things were going. The first thing is how do I keep a campaign alive and growing? So, I talked about how I started off simply with just 3 hexes and home base. Started off very small, but obviously players are going to, grow up and get stronger and start to investigate more of the world and make names for themselves, famous or infamous as the case may be. So how did I keep the world alive and vibrant? Well, some of the things I did was I had a master timeline. So I had my idea of what the campaign was, and I spoke about that, my 3 to 4 sentence intro. I kind of expanded on that a little bit as I played more games, I wrote more things down, and eventually I came to realize I needed a master timeline. Now, this wasn't anything really, detailed. It was more like, okay, in about a year, this is what probably is going to happen in the world. In 3 years, this is what's going to happen. I have a couple of villains in the world. So after 1 year, if nothing else happens, this is where they're going to be at. And this was always kind of if the players did nothing, what would the world do? What would it look like? Some of it I figured out randomly. Some of it I kind of, conjectured based on what I knew about the political entities within my campaign world that I was starting to flesh out. Another thing, something that helped to make the world alive to the players was I came up with a calendar. Seasons change. In my world, the winter is the longest season at 90 days. Spring and fall are 45 days, and summer is 60 days. And I began to say, okay, so maybe in the spring there's a festival. Maybe as soon as it turns to winter, that's when the new year happens. Maybe in the end of summer, there's the annual taxation day, which the players did not like. But just things to help kind of give them some significance and help them to anchor onto, oh, it's New Year's, so we're going to have a big celebration. I also began to look at what things might happen to the NPCs. So, one of my NPCs had something very tragic happen to them after a year. And other NPCs grew or, changed, or maybe they got married, or maybe something else happened. And I kind of picked this up from an old Advanced Dungeons & Dragons supplement called Oriental Adventures, OA, much beloved by some people. One of the neat things in that supplement was they had a random chart that said, here's what happens to your political entities, your kingdoms throughout the year. And I always kind of liked that it made the world around us come alive without me having to sit and figure everything out, because I'm biased. I'm going to throw things in one way or the other, but the chance to have some random elements pop in really makes things very interesting, and it even drives further game ideas. Give you a perfect example. I rolled most recently at the beginning of the new year in my campaign that one of the primary NPCs, the Duke of the Duchy that the players are playing in, was going to have a religious event and then be attacked. So with that result, I came up with the idea that a splinter bad guy group of the common religion of the world was going to try to assassinate the Duke and blame it on the religions that the players were involved in to try to get the players in trouble, which then spawned off actually 3 games worth of fun adventuring. And again, it made the campaign come alive. So just some thoughts there. Think about what you might want to do on a calendar basis. Think about how you want the world to progress, and go from there. I also always seek player feedback. It's always really important to me that I know, are you having fun? Are things working? What interests you? And you'll kind of get that clue from what hooks they most often go after versus what they don't go after. So that kind of helps me to keep the campaign alive and going because, you're really interested in making a lot of money and building up your cult. Okay, so I kind of know how to prep and what little tantalizing things to put out there and what things to do to them that are really going to get them involved in the campaign. I also like the idea that player actions have long-term ripples. Something that they did 2-3 years ago comes back to face them in the future. I always think that's kind of neat to see, and it helps give them a sense of depth in the campaign and also makes them consider their actions. I also introduced off-stage events and things that may influence them. What do I mean by that? Well, here again, with the events that I spoke about, an event may be a significant NPC, a noble or a ruler gets married. And so that perhaps that will, bleed over into the new couple coming through the area that the PCs are at. And so that may influence what happens to them. Another way that at least I kept the campaign alive and growing for me was I introduced other games. So I started a second tabletop campaign early on, and I also started an online game, all taking place within the same world. Now I'm going to cover that, how to do that a little bit later in a future podcast episode, so I don't want to go into too much of that right now. But it was another neat way of making the campaign more alive for me, because more games generates more opportunities for me to generate content, generate new ideas, NPCs, what have you. And it allowed me to explore different aspects of the campaign. Very important that you as a DM also feel a connection to your campaign. Because if you don't, the players are going to know. They're going to know when you're burnt out. They're going to know when, this is kind of a blah game, you're phoning it in, and we've all done it. I've done it. There's been games when I've just been thoroughly off. You got to take care of yourself. Self-care, I guess it would be a good word for it. But you really have to think about, am I doing the things that are going to keep me engaged in this campaign? Because the more engaged I am, then the more engaged I'm going to be in bringing the players in. Other ways I kept the campaign alive is when the mood struck me, I would expand my hex map. I love doing the maps. I can't help it. I love seeing, what little thing is going to be here, what's there. I've got all sorts of little random tools and spreadsheets and whatnot that I've created to help me to do that. And maybe I'll cover those in a future podcast. But I like building the things, or I like building the stories, or I like building, some aspect of it. And so when the mood struck me, I would get in there, I would write it up, I would work on the campaign key for, the maps, or I would work on the maps themselves. And that's kind of how I grew from the 3 hexes into I think now the map is 200 by 150 hexes. I have roughly 20% of it mapped out in terms of things in areas and a key written for it. But that kept it alive for me, and it allows me to introduce things to the players. Treasure maps, there's something over here, a new place that you need to explore, or a hook that comes up that's going to take the players out of their normal area and send them on the adventure. I took the plunge there, and that's how I, came up with the big map. So just some things to think about to keep the campaign alive and growing once you've come up with your initial step. So another thing that I did was, how do I keep players involved in the game, and what do I do with players that drop out or are missing? Because we've all had that. I think there's a meme floating around right now where it shows the scene from Lord of the Rings, I will go with you with my axe. I will, you have my sword, you have my bow. And then one of the characters saying, yeah, Wednesday's not going to work for me, I'm out. We've all ran into the scheduling thing. One of the things that I introduced early on was the concept of, we always start in town and we always end in town. Now, town being civilization. And the idea here was, I didn't want the players to end a session 6 levels deep in a dungeon. Because then when they come back, and you got to have the same people coming back, I wanted to avoid that. And I actually grabbed this idea from Ben Robbins' West March's campaign idea, was that you go out, you do your mission, and you come back. And that takes place in that game, because the group for my games is not consistent from game to game. Now, we meet once a month, so, time is precious. We want to, get in and get done. But even with meeting just once a month, not everybody can be there at the same time. So I established that rule early on. Okay, you guys can do whatever you want, but you always have to start and end in town, so that way we don't have to try and reconstitute everything. Now, if it's a different group, one game to the next, I don't try to explain it. It just is. Oh, look, the dwarf's missing? Okay. Must be off doing something else. No big deal. Everybody just continues on. And the players got to where they were okay with that. It was okay for them to, miss a game. Another thing is I have a sign-up sheet. And with that sign-up sheet is a rule that I will run for at least 4 people, and I will run for no more than 8, maybe 9, depending. I'll stretch that a little bit. But what that does is that gets players to commit. Okay, if I want to play, say, in December, then I'm going to make sure that there's at least 4 people that are showing up, that we have a mission going, and then I, as the DM, know what to prep for, and I know that there's going to be people here. But it might not be the same people. And because I accepted that, and because the players got used to that, they're good with it. They adjust. Sometimes some of the players have multiple characters, so that depending on the party makeup, they will change from one to the other. Another thing that I had to do was, how do I keep track of time in game and between games? Well, because we only play once a month, generally I don't have it be a month of in-game time that passes. Usually it's like a week or 2. In some special situations, depending on what the players are doing, it may be only a day. So I kind of play that by ear. But I actually have a little campaign chart, a little calendar that I keep on a spreadsheet, and I keep track of what dates are where and what's going on and who's where and what's happening. And this also allows me to keep track of what my NPCs are doing as well. So if I know that, NPC X is working on a spell and it's going to take 3 weeks and the players are helping them out, then I can map that into the game. It's nice to have that, so that way I can keep track of it there. How do I award XP? Well, that was another thing that I needed to figure out through the campaign. I had started out using the default Advanced Dungeons & Dragons XP system, and the players were just not getting anywhere, especially since we were only meeting once a month. So I actually went back into history, went back to the original Dungeons & Dragons rules, to look to see what they did there. And I stole the idea from there that for each hit die of monster that they dealt with, they would get 100 experience points. It seems like a lot, but it actually ends up being okay because, again, we only meet once a month. So they get to do some things. They get to have, their game, but it doesn't feel like that they're always first level. Usually they progress pretty quickly with that. I also award 1 experience points for each gold piece of item that they find. I also do award experience points for magic items that are found. Even though magic items are very rare, people get very excited when they find magic in my world, and they've figured out that, this means experience points as well. I also adopted an idea, and I believe I read this on Jeff Rient's blog, of awarding experience for exploring new areas. So this gives the players a little incentive to get out there and explore. And I try to do that from the standpoint of, okay, what would it mean if a first level character went out and explored this? And I'll award the experience points for that. So, if they go to a small unknown location that's really close to town, probably not going to be as significant if to a first level character as opposed to them going, knee deep into orc-held territory and seeing the big city that the orcs have overtaken. To a first-level person, that might actually get them to second level because of the risk involved and the things that they would have to do. So, you could call like a goal reward or what have you, but I find that it's nice to do that, and here again, it encourages the players to explore. I also award for organizational advancement. Now, I got this idea from listening to Jeff Berry, Kyrene Bacall. He blogs a lot, and he's been to some events talking about how the Empire of the Petal Thrones game used to be run. That was run by Professor Barker. And what would happen is as players fulfilled missions that helped the goals of the organizations they were with, whether it was the religion or the temple or the clan, then they would rise in level with that particular organization. And I really like that idea. If a cleric of a church goes out and, rescues a whole bunch of prisoners from the orcs and, does it in the name of the light and, gains converts and what have you, well, the church is going to look pretty favorably on that and award extra XP to them for having promoted the ideals of the church. So that's a little more subjective, and the players do know about that. They know that I make that subjective call. And they're pretty comfortable with it because I always make kind of like a little ceremony of, hey, you've gained a new level and the church really thanks you and here's what's going on with that. So and they seem to really enjoy that. Yeah, and that's generally how I handle XP in the campaign. Now, I am going to have an episode later on where I'm going to talk about when things go off the rails, kind of troubleshooting campaign problems. But hopefully these few ideas that I've put forth will give you some ideas on things that you may encounter as you create your own campaigns and you move forward with them. Thanks a lot for listening. Thank you for being here. And I want to tell you, since this is the first episode I've recorded since releasing the podcast, I'm really excited about all the great feedback I've gotten. Thank you very much for listening and for letting me know how you feel about the podcast. Please, I hope you continue to subscribe. It would be really awesome if you would leave some reviews or ratings either on SoundCloud or on iTunes, which you can get the podcast from. You can find it on dungeonmastershandbook.wordpress.com or at soundcloud.com/dungeonmastershandbook, or you can search for it on iTunes, Blueberry, Google Play. All right, until next time, game on.